Jim Sheils joins me here today. You can learn what he is up to by going to jjplaybook.com. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but I think they can get your book there or one of
Yes.
them.
Yep, they can get a free download there.
Oh, that's awesome. Appreciate you giving everybody that. We're going to be talking about build to rent real estate, which is kind of a different topic. Most of the people that come on this show, they're trying to acquire that's something that's already in existence, but
Yeah,
you build to rent.
I do. I do. I didn't start in build to rent 25 years ago. I was a rehabber for the first 15 years. And then about 10 years ago, I kind of stumbled backwards into instead of finding fixer uppers to fix up and rent or sell, build new construction. And the rest is history.
Well, I've tried to run these type of numbers in my market and I just never work out. Can you give us a breakdown of how you found let's start there. How did you find your way into building to rent versus the latter?
Yeah, well, it was kind of out of necessity. Like I said, after 2008 into 2009, I started to do bulk foreclosures, buying old foreclosures, fixing them up, renting them for myself, or on selling them to investors. And so started doing, I guess, what was called then turnkey real estate. And by 2015, the numbers had just changed in our area, Jack. It wasn't working. Too many people were trying to get in, and if you were trying to make the numbers work, you're almost being forced to cut corners on the rehab, and that never ends well. You always end up
Mhm.
paying more for it. And so my now building partner, who was managing my portfolio, him and his father had a big management company and also a small building operation, came to me and said, "Hey, what would you think about building some investment property instead of, finding old ones to fix up?" And I thought that was a terrible idea. I was a rehabber. I never know anything about new construction, but I'm glad he convinced me and did a small group of properties in Jacksonville, Florida, where we were already living and had done a lot of deals. And we saw that there was something really to it. Some big differences from the old fixer uppers. And I hung up my rehab shoes probably about 8 years ago and only do new construction now.
Well, what markets do you typically focus on?
Yeah, and like you were saying, how do you get the numbers to work? Well, for here in Florida, we're not in Miami, we're not in Tampa, we're not in Orlando, beautiful markets, but a little more emotional and higher priced. So we go to more second tier markets where there's still great population growth, economic growth, and affordability is absolutely key right now. And that's where we choose to build. And we're not only building single families, Jack, we build single families, duplexes, and quads. As an investor, I always loved buying duplexes and quads, but they're harder to find. They're not
Mhm.
often built. And so we saw a need in the markets where a lot of people weren't as attracted, especially through the pandemic, to higher density properties. And we could build for example, a duplex in a nice single family home neighborhood. And a renter would be like, gosh, this is great. I have my own yard. I couldn't afford a single family here, but I can afford half a house. So it kind of evolved just out of what we saw the market was needing, what would help investors' property cash flow better, and we're continuing to fine tune it.
Sure. So you primarily stick to Florida?
We're in Florida right now. We do build for some of the bigger funds and institutions in a couple other states right now. We always test with the big guys before we bring in our individual investor database, but we're building in Texas, areas near Dallas. We're set up to go into Houston and possibly San Antonio. We're also in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. So, but those are bigger projects that we get hired to build for, not for our individual investors. However, we do plan to move into those states eventually with our build to rent program for individual investors.
You wrote this playbook, and I wanted to dive a little bit into the title on that because you cram a lot into a single sentence because it says how I tripled my real estate cash flow and spent more time with my family in 3 years. That sounds like an aggressive time schedule, freeing up some of your time, but let's start with the first part. How did you triple your cash flow?
I went into better properties with multiple units, the duplexes and the quads. So that helped up the cash flow compared to smaller fixer upper single family homes. And that helped to bring up my cash flow. My big lesson, Jack, is own less of better quality. It's really cool to be able to say, oh, on a info sheet, I've done 2,000 rehabs, but if I could go back 25 years, I would do much less deals of better quality. And that was the big switch that I had where I got rid of smaller, troublesome properties and I went into better quality properties and new construction properties. And within a few years, those were planted in the right markets and the rents took a major jump with a lot less maintenance and repairs, with a lot less turnover. In fact, the older properties I had, a tenant was staying an average of 13 months. With our new construction, they're staying an average of 3 years. That's a huge boost to your cash flow when you have a portfolio and you're having less turnover, less maintenance and repairs. And also, these areas had really good rent jumps. So that's what got me there.
I think that's a pretty important thing to call out. Like, especially when you get into real estate investing for that first time, we hear that siren call of distressed properties. And we typically, those distressed properties come with not only issues, but age. And, and then you try to turn these properties into rentals. And next thing you know, a couple $100 in cash flow just doesn't cut it.
No, and you can end up giving it back. That's what I learned. Like I said, when we were doing the rehabs, we could be doing new roofs, heating and cooling, plumbing, updating kitchens, baths, electric. And not that these weren't good houses and didn't create wealth for me, but there was a lot more work because what I found by year 3, I just knew, Jack, I call it the 3-year curse, that my maintenance and repairs almost always was going to take a jump. It
Mhm.
just did. And that's after already having probably 2 turnovers. And when we went to the new construction, we didn't see that. And they were staying longer and our turn costs on a rental, it went down 70% on a new construction compared to the old ones. So there's different factors for that. When I said more time with my family, I was doing less deals of better quality. And I was like, why didn't I start doing this 25 years ago? And it's a big
Right.
lesson.
Well, I wanted to call out the time with your family. I've had conversations with other investors and people who are looking to get into real estate investing. More times than not, we will react to pain instead of heading towards any kind of what we would perceive as goal or pleasure. Can you talk a little bit about your end goal, like how you established your why to make sure you push towards those results?
Yeah, I saw a lot of guys that made me really nervous. They had financially succeeded in real estate, but they were absolutely married to it. They were on all the time, and it almost was like a badge of honor. But if you probably went back to that first real estate investing class and they put you in the scenario, what would you do if you had passive income or money coming in and you can make your own schedule? What do we oh, I'd keep up this passion. I'd be traveling with my family. I would do this. And I saw guys that their wealth had grown substantially, but they were more, you know, and so for me, I just I set just a fine line in the sand that I said, I'm not going to miss my kids growing up. And I have quite an array, Jack. I go from 3 to 21 with 5 kids. So I've seen all stages, obviously, and it goes quick. It was a mentor of mine said, just remember the years are not all created equal. Your 5-year-old's not going to hang out with, will hang out with you more than your 25-year-old. And a lot of people in the real estate, when I went into it, it was, put your head down for 5 to 10 years and then get back to your family and they'll understand. I think that's horrendous advice with knowing that the years are not all created equal. So I've set a lot of rhythms in my life to make sure that I'm there for them, that we're, spending a lot of time together, lots of adventure. We are definitely more about experiences more than material. And if you're more about material, that's fine. Be true to yourself. But we are definitely more the experience family and adventure family than material. And I just stay true to that. So we've been able to take some incredible adventures over the years. And for my business, my business partner, my staff, I encourage them to do it, but I do it unapologetically. I've earned that
Mhm.
right, and I don't apologize for time with my family.
I see, behind you it says 18 summers. Is that in reference to the time you
Yeah,
have with your kids?
yeah, that's the family book I wrote. So we have my wife and I have a family education company called 18 Summer. It's how do you make sure entrepreneurs, succeed in business and succeed at home. And that was taught to me again by a mentor who said, you got 18 summers. There was some study done where I think the average person will spend about 85% of the quality time they ever have with their child by the end of the 18th summer. And when you start to look at that and realize that, you start to look at things differently. Now, I think too, if you're intentional in those first 18 years, you're not down to 15% more time with them. You could have 20, 25, 30, 35% plus more with them. But also I've seen, unfortunately, some successful people that they didn't do it right the first 18 years, and their children now as adults don't have a lot to do with them, and they kind of view them as a stranger. It's a little bit strained, and man, that's depressing because you and I know how hard real estate is, and to not reap that reward, what you were probably originally looking for, is kind of sad.
Can you give people some ideas then on how to, we always talk about this, actually kind of think it's a bit of a fable, this whole work-life balance business. But there seems to be a distinction there that you've made to make sure that you kind of keep things at bay.
Yeah, couple of things. You gotta have times where you're completely and totally unavailable. So do a tech fast. You come home, you're a busy real estate investor. You gotta get away from your laptop and your phone for some time in order to be there fully for your family. Because if you're taking that one text or email or such, that's distracting and you're not fully there. I'm a big believer in setting some simple rhythm. My wife and I, for example, we hit date night every week. It is very rare we'll miss date night. I've done talks before where it's a very successful room. I said, how many of you have a weekly date with your spouse? And less than 10% of the room's hands go up. So date night's been important. And then in my family book, I talk about that. I spend a half day to a day, a quarter with each one of my children, just one on one. And that has been absolutely pinnacle to keeping a relationship with them. We also plan adventures together, and we try to make sure around dinner time we don't have distraction, that we're all sitting down together. So that's just a few things, and people go, oh, but there's got to be more. Well, start with that. Get together once a quarter with each of your children, undistracted, without a phone, just one on one for half a day. Do something fun together. Keep a date with your spouse every week. Same bat time, same bat channel. We do ours every Wednesday night, normally 5:30 to 8:30. And then always keep a family adventure planned, whether it's close or bigger. That's something that keeps things in the horizon. And it's always good for us to be planning the next adventure.
Just to remind everybody, you can learn more and take advantage of the free book by heading over to jjplaybook.com, jjplaybook.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor. Share this with one of your investor friends. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So, Jim, you've been doing this real estate game for quite some time. Can you kind of give us some insight on some of the challenges that you've experienced while you were scaling yourself?
Oh, I mean, you got to find the right deals, you got to finance the deals, and you got to manage the deals, right? So there's always a challenge in that. There'll be times where you can find great deals and you don't have the financing, or you can manage the deal, but you can't find deals. So keeping those three things going is important. I think finding good partners too is something that, we can pick the right partners, we can pick the wrong partners. It's something that you got to be really aware of. And also, picking the wrong property. They're already starting to do real estate, and I've said to them, own less of better quality. I was a deal junkie. I was just doing so many to turn them over. And yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll make that one work. Oh, we didn't make anything. Oh, we lost a few grand. And it didn't make sense when I look back on it. So one of my biggest things, I guess would be wrong partners, wrong areas, and wrong type of properties. Don't try to force deals.
So somebody who's interested in your product, the built to rent situations, like, can you talk a little bit about what you do to help people through those pain points you just mentioned?
Yeah. Well, we designed our program because our avatar person is successful in their career. They own a practice or a business or a really good position in the company they're in, and they want to be exposed to real estate, but they don't have the time, and their backyard might not be the best suited. And plus, they don't really want to build a team. They don't want a second or third job. They understand they should own real estate, that the long term buy and hold has a great track record for creating wealth, but someone's got to fill in the pieces. And that's what we try to do. We try to take all those risks of finding the right deal, building it the right way, financing it for them, and managing it for them. So we bring in all those things. Now we build right because we only do new construction. We don't offer rehab properties at all anymore. and we're going into areas that we follow some real clear fundamentals if it'll keep growing. One of the biggest ones is affordability, like you said, Jack. Like, how do the numbers, how do you get them to work? Well, we go to affordable second tier markets where there's still population growth and great economy, but we're not going to Miami where it's over $700,000. We're still in houses in Central Florida with great growth that are 260, 270 new construction. So that makes a huge difference. Financing right now, as you know, is one of the most important things. Rates have jumped. We were at a 26-year high a few weeks ago. We offer in-house financing, something that we've been able to start about 2 years ago. So where the bank is normally quoting you 7.25%, let's say for a duplex, we're getting it done for between 3.75 and 4.25%. So we're actually beating the banks by a full 3% a lot of the times. And that's long-term debt. That's either a 30-year AM 10-year fixed or 30-year AM 30-year fixed. No like short-term adjustables. So that financing absolutely gets them off on the right foot. And then management in place. We have a lot of investors, with us. We have a lot of Florida investors, but a lot of investors from all over the country, from the West Coast. They like Florida. They like the fundamentals. They like the landlord laws. So it'd be really hard for them to manage from afar. So we were managing before we were building. So our goal is to manage it right. One of the keys and secrets to managing it right, though, Jack, to kind of unveil is it's easier for us because we're building better properties in better areas. That's a lot easier to manage than some of the stuff that I used to do. And that helps. But our goal is, again, a busy professional who's buying a small portfolio of properties with us. They shouldn't spend more than 1 to 2 hours a month overseeing their things if we're doing our job right. That's what we shoot for.
Well, could you kind of share a story of somebody who came into your program and where they are today and how things are going? Give us a positive experience.
Sure. I just talked to him day before yesterday. So my friend Tom, my now friend Tom, he came to us about 8 years ago. Tom ran a very successful mortgage company. He was wanting to step back from it, and we had a kindred spirit right away. His wife was preparing to receive a kidney donation. He really wanted to be there for that. He wanted to have more time with her. He was former Air Force. He wanted to keep flying and wanted a new plane. So he had some big goals. I had a similar experience years ago. I donated a kidney to my father. So this is something we connected on right away. And he said, look, I don't want short-term rentals because there's just too much involvement. I've had older properties in these areas. I love your new construction. He said, so I'd like to get in. So he bought 2 properties, then he bought 3 more, and then he bought 3 more. This was over about a 3-year span. He just continued rolling more into it. By the time his wife was ready, I show it in some of my talks. He sent me the text, hey, I retired from Fairway Mortgage and your property's a lot to do with it because they were producing almost 12,000 a month cash flow, 7 figures in equity. He said the last rental that he bought paid for the payment for his new plane. So he was keeping his hobby. He was able to be there with his wife. And he said that being able to leverage out of his time and not be involved like he had been on some of his other rentals was absolutely key. So that's one I just talked to the day before yesterday, and his wife's doing great, and he's probably out flying right now.
What kind of ducks do people have to get into a row to make sure that they're ready to get into one of your properties?
Well, you need a minimum to start building a portfolio with us. And our goal, our most successful investors, the biggest core of them buy about 3 to 8 properties. That becomes a solid little portfolio, its own residual business. We have people that buy less, obviously, and people that go up and buy up to 25 we've had from an individual investor. But, they're looking to build a small portfolio. To get that started, Jack, you need about $80,000 to get started. If you have less, like there's no way I could have used this program when I started. I had about, I think, 22,000 to buy that first property, and I was stretching it there. But for the right fit, we know we can start to build your portfolio for that amount and then incrementally grow it, like I just said, like we did for Tom. But the starting point is about 80,000. You got to have good credit to be able to qualify for our in-house financing and, a little bit of time. If you say I have no time at all, I can't do anything, then we're not for you. We do want to tell people you want about 1 to 2 hours a month slated, whether you use it or not, but slated to oversee your rental portfolio. You are an active investor owning property. So those are just a few of the things that we, get your ducks in a row, as you said.
Could you, during this, I'm sure you've experienced plenty of lessons. What was the most expensive lesson learned along the way?
Most expensive lesson learned along the way is we now self-build everything. So we're our own builder in every market that we build in. As we started to branch out of Northeast Florida, like Central Florida, we hired a builder. And this was years ago, but this builder hadn't been paying the subs on several jobs. And we had to step into about a $2.5 million nightmare to pay up subs and stuff. When a builder is not financially healthy, you can get a judgment, but that judgment's not worth very much if they're broke. We had a very expensive lesson, and we said, you know what? We're going to have to become a self builder. We're going to have to be the builder on everything because we need that control. That was a tough move to make, but I'll tell you, we made that move before the pandemic. And had we gone into the pandemic not being our own self builder, there was so much competition and need for a builder, we probably wouldn't have gotten our projects done.
Could you spend a little time on the numbers associated with this? Like your product, you mentioned single family homes up to a fourplex. What numbers are we talking about for these type of buildings, and what type of cash flow have you typically seen?
Yeah. Since we're in 12 different markets, hard to gauge, but a wide range is, starting point of 267,000 for a single family home in Central Florida, right up to 950,000 for a quad in a higher end area of Jacksonville, Florida. So that's kind of our range. And then obviously rents will go accordingly as well. After expenses, our cash flow, we're looking to get people a more of a cash on cash return of about anywhere from 6 to 9% to start. We try to stay conservative with our numbers.
Well, this has been really an interesting conversation. Before we jump into any kind of rapid fire questions and close out the episode, is there any topic we should have hit on at this
I don't think so, Jack. You led a pretty good interview.
point? Well, I appreciate hearing that, but save that in case you don't like these rapid fire questions.
Fair enough.
Just again, it's jjplaybook.com, jjplaybook.com. Make sure you take advantage of the free book offer there. But if you're ready, we'll close out with some rapid fires.
Sounds good.
What lie do real estate investors often tell themselves?
I can make the numbers work.
That happens more often than I would like to admit. You kind of, like you said, you become a deal junkie.
It's forcing numbers is just a very unhealthy habit that a lot of us have gotten into.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Own less of better quality.
Do you have a book recommendation, or what are you reading right now?
I'm reading The One Thing by Gary Keller. Great real estate book.
Yeah, very
My
good.
second time reading it.
Have you found that there's certain books that I do like once a year, I kind of revisit?
Yeah, there's a couple I keep going back to as well.
Yeah, I've been rereading Never Split the Difference lately again.
Oh, Chris Voss.
Yeah, great,
Yeah,
really good
good
book.
one. Yeah.
And then finally, what single strategy or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time-saving impact to you or your business?
Again, going from old fixer-uppers to new construction. That's not a tool, but it's just what we did. So that's more of an underlying, overall system overhaul. But the daily huddle is pretty important for our sales team that I lead,
Sure.
and that's been really good.
Well, you mentioned the new construction or moving to that. Most successful entrepreneurs, they do have to make a pivot or two until they find their actual niche.
Yeah, that is for sure. If you think it's going to be a straight line, then I got news for you.
Well, find one more time, jjplaybook.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes, but this is a great conversation. I really appreciate the value you brought to the show today.